Welcome, Darja. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you here. And I am super excited to learn about all of these cool things that you are introducing to help women and really anybody accelerate in their careers. So, without further ado, let's dive right in and let's talk about Darja. Like, tell us your story. What makes Darja Darja?
Super excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invite and thanks for having me. What makes Darja Darja? I think probably two things first and foremost, and probably a few things after, but two things being entrepreneurship and psychology. I think I have a passion for both.
Hmm.
And I think my story is very intertwined between both as well. So I grew up with an actual entrepreneurial mom who was a big influence on my life. I think a parent that really kind of pushed me to always see challenges and problems and help resolve them for others. So I think that's a very significant influence on who I am. But at the same time, I'm also a psychologist by training, but also I think to a degree by heart. I'm really curious to not only understand human behavior and kind of help decode it, but at the same time also I think as a person in the workplace, I'm just extremely motivated and feel a lot of gratification from seeing people grow. And so I think it inspired most of the decisions I took throughout my career is to always double down on opportunities where I can lift others up and through that myself as well.
That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about, you have been an academic, you were studying your PhD, and then you said, okay, you like decided to stop your studies and just dive right into the entrepreneurial space and launch a company within the last year. And you've been really successful. What would you attribute to that success? Like what I would say, what gave you the clarity, but then what also helped you get that momentum to go forward?
This is a really good question. Thank you for asking that particular question. I think I've ruminated a lot what kind of pushed me to do it, and I think it's a less interesting question to answer from a perspective of I kind of didn't have a choice. I think because during my PhD, I was studying something similar to I think what I'm working on right now with Bunch. I was also interested in the human performance. In particular, I was looking into creative performance under pressure and
Hmm.
the intersection to leadership. So I was already kind of drawn to that whole topic. But I think when I started doing empirical research with founders, I
Hmm.
really understood that this is my tribe, if that makes sense. So I think
Yes.
the intellectual side of me always enjoyed the research, and there's a few things or a lot of things I actually enjoyed during my academic period. However, I always struggled imagining myself being in that world for kind of the rest of my life. And I felt quite trapped very often.
Hmm.
And I didn't dare to break out for a really long time, which is why I spent 3.5 years researching and publishing papers. And I always had this pressure of like, how, you can't just leave a PhD program. Like 0.9% of the population ever get the chance. So Daria, please appreciate and finish it.
Right.
And I'm really happy I did because it definitely, I think, is much more my thing to build businesses and to solve problems in a slightly more dynamic way
Right.
than you can in academia. But I really enjoy that intersection between kind of organizational behavior and then also research, which plays a big role at Bunch again, and
Mhm.
knowledge. And then the dynamic kind of approach to solving problems, the iteration, the agile
Right.
development that we currently see, especially in the tech realm. And I think on the success side, well,
Uh-huh.
not being a foreigner to the imposter syndrome, which
Uh-huh.
visits me often, which maybe some of our audience also can relate to.
Absolutely.
I I don't always know actually what makes me successful, and if I do have success, I always wonder, am I really? Maybe it's just by chance, and it
Right.
was just luck,
Mhm.
and it's tricky to think about it, but hence I'm glad you asked it because I do think there's a few factors that I have built on over time, and I think they're probably worth sharing. I really believe that being obsessed with the problem is a very important part of not
Mm.
only entrepreneurship, but I think overall of any successful career. In the end, it's really the passion, the dedication, the focus, and
Mhm.
the persistence that you exert as an individual to really think hard about the problem that you're working on. And I think
Mhm.
if you do that, in probably majority of the cases, you will produce very meaningful outcomes, and you will see positive impact on your surroundings, and therefore also on your team and yourself. But it's really difficult to sustain over long
Right.
periods of time unless you're really passionate and motivated and intrinsically motivated to work on that topic. And I think that has been a big mantra of mine for the past couple of years, which also
Mhm.
leads to the ability to say no, which for me personally was always very hard, still is hard.
Right.
But I've learned to appreciate it, and to push myself harder to really ask, is it necessary right now? Does it help me to complete my goals? Is this in line with my mission?
Mhm.
And does it really actually lead to anything meaningful? Because there's a lot of opportunities in the world, that you can jump on, but it's kind of also like a bus. They come and go, and you can jump on the next one. So thinking really hard about what is it that you are working on, why you're working on it, and then making deliberate choices on where to spend your time and energy, I think is very important.
That's fantastic that you mentioned that because you gave yourself the time and the space, right, to ask yourself those questions. And those are hard questions to ask of really aligning yourself to your North Star and really determining, is this going to get me there? How is this going to be beneficial? Now, you had a significant decision where you said, in your head, you were playing out all these things of like, how can I drop out of this PhD program? Nobody ever does that. So there were all these limiting beliefs and these kind of like maybe social norms that you were kind of playing to. What were, take me through that of like, how did you weigh out the risk and reward?
Hmm.
What were the questions that you asked yourself? And what was that defining moment that you just said, that's it, I'm doing it?
That's a really good question as well. I think the I'm I'm kind of a mixed decision maker, and maybe that probably also counts for most people. But like my approach to these big decisions is to make a big Excel and then start entering some criteria and then start scoring.
Uh-huh.
So I absolutely did that this time as well. But then in the end, funny enough, you like kind of scratch the criteria, and then you like try to listen to your gut and then say, okay, I'm going to go this way. So I think this was one of these decisions again. And I think I thought about this for a really long time. And I think, if I remember correctly, the criteria that I think I looked at is kind of how motivated do I feel to work on the topic. And that's what made it tricky for me in this particular decision, because I liked my topic,
Mhm.
right? I believed what I'm researching is useful and meaningful. The other part I think that played a big role was, colleagues and kind of my peers. Whom am I
Mhm.
surrounded by? There is this concept around you are the average, of the people that surround you.
Around you,
And there
yes.
is nothing there is nothing to say against academics per se, right? Like academics are wonderful people, intellectual people are very interesting. It's great to listen to them.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I also felt I miss the drive of wanting to change the world, not only study it.
Mm.
Um, so that I think score didn't go like all as high as I wished it would have been.
Mhm.
And I think the other part is exactly this, like how much impact can I make? What I will spend many years and many hours per day because I am a very dedicated worker in that sense. I like working.
Mhm.
Um it's not always positive. I also struggle with the price that I pay for it, but I really
Setting
like my work. And
boundaries.
exactly, boundaries very
Mhm.
difficult in many ways, but I really enjoy working on specifically problems that I like. However, I also do want to see that my time and energy is paying off, and I think being mid 30s now, I also know life is not unlimited. It will
Right.
potentially eventually end. I need to make sure I make the most of it. And I couldn't really answer this really well in the PhD because I
Mhm.
felt, how many people ever read a scientific paper on
Mm.
leadership? And when I started doing research in the field, I also realized and kind of confirmed my previous internship type of experience that
Mhm.
practitioners don't really read these papers.
Right.
And the amount of time it takes until my research, or anyone's research for that matter, hits the mainstream bookstore
Mm-hmm.
I think Simon Sinek and Adam Grant are doing a fantastic job at this.
Mm-hmm.
But what about everyone else?
Right.
So like all this other research that we're finding out day by day gets published but doesn't get read, I think was a very important, very stressful moment for me, because I felt this doesn't feel right. I can't be producing this type of
Mm-hmm.
insights for the rest of my life when only very few people have access to it, and it really bugged me.
Mm-hmm.
And funny enough, it actually plays such a big role for Bunch right now, because one of the I think the mission tangents, one of the aspects of our mission is really to democratize access to leadership knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it has a lot to do with my time during my PhD studies,
Right.
where I was really frustrated about the fact that there is so much knowledge out there already. It's just that we don't apply it because we can't access it. And we're also too busy to consume 32-page long scientific papers. It's really inaccessible. And so it was an important aspect, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, we Bunch and Beyond Barriers are very similar in that we are trying to democratize that access and get that transfer of knowledge out there so that people
Absolutely.
can be the most exceptional leader that they can be. And my question to you is, I loved what you said, because I do follow and read some of a lot of your stuff. And you mentioned that there are limiting beliefs that many people have, that leadership is this innate equality, or this kind of like you're either born with it, or that there are leaders and there are non-leaders, and it's just some natural thing. And through your research and everything that you said, is that this is not true. It's something that can be learned. It's a skill that can be learned. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you discover that? And how are you helping people find their inner leader?
Yes. I think when we think back on what leadership, even as a term, kind of is associated with, still, I believe,
Mhm.
we notice this sometimes in our user research and marketing research,
Mhm.
that the term itself is not a very inclusive term, because in the past, historically, we've seen white male leaders carrying the troops forward, right?
Right.
Like the Napoleons of the world, and so on. And I think there is nothing wrong with that part of history per se, as being it being history. And
Right.
we've moved forward and we've moved on as humanity and as a society in our understanding what it means to rally people, to help people to stand up and to make the change that they want to see in the world. And I think this is what I've always been motivated by. And I think when you start building a startup, you kind of just start somewhere. So the definition part of things doesn't come until like very much after, when you already have half of the product and then the
Right.
user base, and then people suddenly ask you, what did you define as leadership? And so I actually took a few weeks to think about this question before we kind of settled on a definition. But I think in my eyes, what leadership means today is to have positive impact on yourself and others.
Mm.
And this is, in my eyes, a set of behaviors. This is a commitment, it's an attitude, it's a choice you have
Mhm.
every single day with every single person you meet.
Right.
And as a leader, you can achieve this impact, or you can also fail in achieving this impact, or you can also decide not to pursue it actively because of whatever other priorities you currently have. So
Right.
this kind of unlinks the role of managers that we oftentimes, I think, synonymously use for
Yes.
leaders from the actual leadership act, which is an act of commitment, of dedication, of responsibility.
Mhm.
And I believe that once we kind of commit to this, or once we understand it a bit more inclusive, and in a way that it's a set of behaviors, it opens up the opportunity that everyone on a team, independent of their role and
Mhm.
independent of their department or whatever their hierarchical level is, actually can and does lead in certain situations.
Right.
And on the flip side, many of the negative consequences or many of the negative situations we see in teams today or in organizations today. And I think it's probably gotten worse over the impact that COVID has had, because virtual collaboration is even more difficult than collaboration in real life.
Right.
A lot of these negative the kind of symptoms that we see have to do with the fact that there is either a lack of clarity that everyone can actually step up and lead,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes teams are left in waiting, kind of not understanding, oh, I could actually interject right now and I could probably help the group to move forward. I could ask a question, I could come in with a statement, I could give a perspective, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't dare to do so because they aren't the leader, right? They aren't the
Right.
manager of the group. They are not the facilitator or the moderator of that meeting. And so many things go wrong because of that. And we miss so many opportunities that at one point we basically decided to, or we understood with our community of users as well, which is over 15,000 right now,
Mm-hmm.
that in the end, it's really a matter of attitude and mindset. And the more we all encourage each other to step up and lead, the more
Mm-hmm.
we benefit from each other. So it's not a phenomenon of the negative side of power, so to say. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
like if I lead, you can't. It's
Right.
more a dance and a dynamic type of phenomenon where if you get stuck right now, I can take over and I can jump in. And then once I can actually fall back a little bit more, then you can come in. And it becomes this behavioral pattern
Mm-hmm.
rather than a title or a role or any type of kind of formalized responsibility. And I think this is, to be honest, one of the reasons why we speak to so many people, because we open up this kind of box of, and these are all the tactics
Right.
that typically are
Right.
only taught to managers, but who actually said you, team member, can't know about them?
Right.
And it doesn't make any sense that you don't know about them because effectively their tactics, how to communicate better, how to have better meetings, how to give better feedback. And
Right.
couldn't we all benefit from it? It wouldn't be all a bit easier if we would all be more literate in that regard. So I think the traction we see with Bunch has a lot to do, or has
Mm-hmm.
just as much to do with the fact that the product experience is engaging and good. But I think, if not even more, just with the fact that we speak to this marginalized, huge part of the population
Mm-hmm.
that kind of sits there and says, I probably could do some of these things, but I kind of need that push. And like my manager is not pushing me, and my colleagues are not seemingly, they don't seem that interested in me stepping up either. So I
Right.
probably will try and see how I get along. And I think when you actually get a tool on your hand that encourages you every day to
Mm-hmm.
take the lead and to step up, I think it becomes much, much, much easier.
Right. So you're kind of fostering or encouraging this idea of bringing your diversity, like diversity of thought, right? And allowing almost crowdsourcing leadership in a group or in a room, right? That everybody can kind of come in and give their perspective and you have a more informed decision opposed to one perspective and everybody kind of has that halo effect that they kind of just nod and agree. And then you fall into this whole group think issue where everybody is thinking one way and it could be the wrong way.
Absolutely.
I think
I
that's
love this
fantastic.
phrasing, by the way. It's great phrasing. I think it's fantastic. Crowdsourcing leadership wisdom and leadership perspectives and leadership courage, I think, is exactly what it's about. Yes.
Fantastic. I love that. Now, let's shift gears a little bit because, you were in this academic space and, doing all the research, gathering the empirical data. And then you said, okay, I'm going to just dive right into the entrepreneurship. And so that definitely is, changing paths and really changing lanes
Mhm.
dramatically. What gave you like, how did you seek out like the advisors, the mindset, the influential people who all of a sudden you're like, okay, I know what it's like to be a researcher and I'm surrounded by academics and everything, but now I want to run a business. How did you get access to people who helped you figure out what you needed to do?
Mhm. So I think the beginnings of Bunch were actually much more bootstrapped and kind of like grassroots efforts, which I think gave me a lot of confidence. So when I started the business, I actually wasn't even looking so much to do kind of the VC backed startup thing.
Mhm.
I didn't really think much about the big picture immediately. I think what I was interested in is I saw a problem and I wanted to solve it. So I saw the
Mhm.
problem that many founders, many entrepreneurs always get blocked by, or many times get blocked by a very similar barrier, and that being that they are so focused on their customers and their product and the fundraising and the operations that the human factor oftentimes gets way too little attention. And
Mm,
the consequence of this is that they actually, if they build a really good beginning team, and the core DNA of the company is very much related with teams, especially in the tech space, they can't scale it. So either
mhm.
it fails in the first kind of like trials already and it's difficult,
Right.
or even if that works, the first 10, 15 people, they are this glued together group, but then you get funding and then you try to scale up to 20, 30, 50 and beyond. And that becomes very difficult. And there's a lot of cultural eruption happening, and companies imploding. And I was just always thinking about this from a perspective again of like, this is not magic.
Right.
Scaling and building teams requires dedication, and it requires thought, and it requires intentional thinking and acting. However, it isn't that difficult as we all make it. There is no
Mhm,
reason why so many teams and organizations need to struggle so hard. And I'm not
mhm,
even talking about the real problems in the workplace, like the lack of diversity, for instance. I think a lot of the what we see in the workplace right now is actually kind of unnecessary, and we can tackle it. We
mm,
have what it takes. We just need to understand what's happening. We need to find the right methods and the right rituals and the right
mhm,
kind of initiatives, and then we need to execute them and learn from
mhm,
whether we achieved what we need to achieve or whether we need to try again. So iterate, iterate, and iterate. And I think observing this inspired me and also encouraged me to go out and do the thing that we're doing with Bunch right now. I think this was the beginning of the
mhm,
company, really connecting and bringing insights from the research world,
mhm.
digesting it down into tangible, actionable, bite-sized information that a busy entrepreneur can understand
Right.
and can act upon, and basically feeding them with an understanding of what's happening in their companies, but at the same time being able to put in place simple rituals that are
Mhm,
effective and impactful. And in the beginning of the company, we had a consultancy driven model. So even though we were quite standardized and used a lot of templates and kind of were developing a database, which was the beginning of the product actually,
right.
we really were just kind of like a consultancy of a few people. We started growing. I hired a few more freelance psychologists and a few more consultants, and we started kind of just onboarding more and more clients. And at one
Mhm,
point in time, one of our investors that invested in us as the very first kind of institutionalized angel
mhm.
picked this up in the market and basically called me out and said, well, Daria, this is great that you're doing this as a consultancy, but isn't this like already becoming kind of half of a product? I mean, it's not that you're sitting there in long
Right.
workshops with these founders, you're actually
Mhm,
feeding them the right information at the right time. And that looks much like a product to me, which probably many more people will need in the future. And, future of work. And
yeah.
I love to support you on this journey, and we all will need more of this. And I think this was the first moment where it actually really occurred to me that, this may be my mission after all. This may actually be my contribution to
Mhm,
the world in a way to make sure everyone in the world that ever has or runs into a people challenge
uh-huh.
or a human challenge at work has the right answers at the tip of their hand
Right.
whenever they need it.
That's fantastic. And, I love what you were saying that, there are rituals and habits that, will help you be successful. What are some of the daily habits or rituals that are key to your career success? What are some of these things that you say I practice every day, especially when I'm dealing with some sort of conflict or some sort of roadblock in my workspace?
I would love to share a few things that have worked for me, but also maybe the things that I'm struggling with, because I'm a big believer in in sharing challenges.
Uh-huh.
I think, yeah, it's really interesting because I do believe that not all the same things work for everyone, right? We are
Right.
all different in our preferences. I think what has worked for me really well as an individual in terms of productivity and kind of staying focused is I am definitely an early riser and trying to be a early kind of evening kind of person. So I try to get to bed and winding down actually quite early, between like 10 and 11 latest. not always successfully yet, but really trying hard, because I think as the key to a successful morning and to an early morning is an early evening. I think that's very clear. I think sleep is extremely important. And most founders and most executives and managers I know are struggling with this. And I think if we would be better with it, many things would be easier for us and for our teams. But I really try that. I think journaling has also changed the game, even though I am still in this phase where I'm kind of doing it for a few days in a row, and then I'll lose it again, and then I need to pick it up. So I'm still in this like habit building phase of, eventually I think I will end up in a space where it becomes a natural routine, but it definitely requires a lot of effort and dedication to actually keep it up. When I journal, I've tried a few different questions, and I think the best, or the learning I made there, is keeping it simple is the best. So kind of like 3 questions max. I tried like 8 and then 5 and 2. I think 3 is a good number.
Okay.
And meditation has changed the game for me. However, just as with running, it was a really long period of time where I didn't understand what it does. And being as a very kind of active and extrovert person, it isn't easy to sit on a couch or lie on a bed for 20 minutes and be quiet. But as I continued doing it, and I think Calm helped me a lot. So I'm in the Calm camp. I know Headspace is doing also an amazing job. And there's probably many others, but I think you need to develop a taste for it. And eventually, when you actually have enough patience, it becomes, at this point, it's something that I can't live without anymore, because some days are really stressful and there is a lot of like conflicts or critical conversations, negotiations with investors, whatever it may be. If I meditate in the morning, at least 15 minutes, better 20, and I meditate in the evening, I know it will go better. And it's really kind of magical, because I don't really know why. I haven't dug too much into the brain science yet, but it really, really, really helps. And it probably took me 2 years or so to actually get to the point where it becomes effective. So it's a really long journey for me. And last but not least, I'm a big reader. And when I started the company, I started losing it because it was just too much to do. And I felt like I can't fit that in. I didn't want to allow myself to read because I could be doing business things in that time. And like, how can I read? And now I actually established a really good routine, which I really can highly recommend to anyone who likes reading. It's the typical, I think, thing, but it's when you get to do it, it's really effective. Not having a phone past like your bedtime, so to say, and actually reading a book in bed before going to sleep, I think is really good. And then I do podcasts and audiobooks in the morning, and also do my bunch dip in the morning when I make coffee and tea. So that's, I guess, my kind of my personal rituals. But on the team ritual side, I think we do eat our own dog food at Bunch, of course. So I do try a few of the tips. And I think my favorite one currently is the behavioral retrospective.
That's interesting. Share.
So when I have 2 co-founders, and co-founder relationships are very complicated because they're kind of like colleague relationship, but at the same time, you're kind of married to yourself and then to your company. And it's very weird. We have 3 people, so it doesn't make it easier always. But what I have learned, when dynamics get complicated between the 3 of us, we've tried different things. And at this point, because we've been doing it for a few years now, we also, I think, have fun with the conflicts. You know, it's like, it is annoying in that moment, but at the same time, we know, okay, we need to try another template now, because that's how we can resolve it. So the behavioral retrospective is really interesting because it borrows from the agile framework of retrospecting in software teams. And you can apply to a 2-people conflict or 3-people kind of retrospective. And it's really straightforward, but because in the app you have the template that kind of guides you through step by step, we basically then open the app, and the first step is you write down your frustration. So like, I feel like this and this and this, and you focus on behavior. So you're allowed to say, well, you, Jim, like, do you do these things always? And this makes me feel like this and this and this. But it's very important that it's kind of like, not because you are that type of person, it's more around the behavior. And then the second step is that you actually share and listen without interruptions, ask clarifying questions. You're giving like a few question prompts, which are okay to be clarifying questions and refrain from immediately defending yourself. And then the third step, I think, is to focus on kind of alternatives. So what can be done? And you can brainstorm this together, and then you take away action items and you go away. And I yet have to see a conflict that we haven't been able to solve this way.
Hmm.
And it's really impressive because you go in and you're really heated at times and it's like a lot at stake. But
Yes.
then you walk out after an hour and you're like, okay, this feels good. The action items make sense. I feel calm now. It's good. So yeah, that's probably the
That's
my recommendation.
fantastic. And I think the other kind of encouragement that you get out of this is that even the best of us who know all of these like tactics, that it's only human, you still run into conflict. And, and sometimes, I'll get frustrated with myself and say, okay, better. Like we shouldn't even be having this conflict because we're in the business of, making people successful. And it's like, well, it's
Absolutely.
human. So no, we're not going to be able to stop it, but we know how to solve it and how to work around it and work through it. So I think that's fantastic. And I'm so glad you shared that, because then like you said, if you follow the template, if you follow the model, then you come out to a very positive,
Absolutely.
solution at the end. And it
Constructive.
works.
Yeah.
And, and
Yeah.
then there you also have like, just social proof and proof that, hey, this is working. It actually works when you
Exactly.
apply it. So it's fantastic.
Exactly. And maybe to kind of connect back to the point that I think you made earlier around how does it actually, what's up with this leadership as a behavior type of
Right.
topic, and how do we actually become leaders nowadays, and how do we formulate these like behaviors that are successful behaviors? I think it's really important that maybe another attitude that we see changing and that already is very prevalent in the new generation, so millennials and Gen Z, is
Hmm.
we're all work in progress. Everything is kind of like an iteration. We're never
Yes.
complete, we're never done. And so we can't ever be the perfect leader that maybe we thought we need to be in the past.
Right.
And this idea of just trying things out again and again and again every day, not because you want to be perfect, but because what else would you do, right? Like you
Right.
run into an issue or challenge, you try a solution idea, maybe from someone that has shared it with you, or someone you learn from, you reflect upon that learning and you move on. And so the idea, I think the change that we see in the current generation, which is really important and I think really moves the needle or moves us as humanity really significantly forward, is to admit that we make mistakes, that we misstep,
Hmm.
and that the most important thing is that we improve every day. And even if it's only 1%, and maybe in some days it's 0.1,
Hmm.
and in some others maybe it's 5, but there isn't really an absolute ceiling to what you can achieve, and there is so much that you can change about yourself and your life. There isn't really an end to how moldable I think we are,
Hmm.
and you're in the driver's seat in the end, right? So you decide to pick up
Hmm.
the template and to try it out, and you decide to step up and say, this may be funny, but I do have this thing I
Yeah.
want us to try. Because in the end, I think this is a very known quote, but many great things lie beyond discomfort, beyond the uncomfortable conversation, but also maybe beyond the uncomfortableness of like trying a new thing and coming
Right.
up with a new idea. So definitely, I think this is something very important, and in my eyes is a big game changer for also female leadership, because I do think women lead differently, and I think there is a lot of room
Mhm.
now to actually do that.
Yeah, and I love what you said that, in for these younger generations, millennials, the Gen Zers, all of them, they are used to an environment. I mean, especially in this digital age, right? That products and things are always innovating. So there's always, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. And so it only makes sense that as a person as well, you're constantly innovating and improving and changing. And so you're never going to be this static product. You're constantly growing.
Exactly.
And I love what you said too, is that, I always attribute it to like, okay, you've got to embrace growth, a mindset of growth. And there is that saying of, growing pains. And so it's going to be painful in some cases, right? But it kind of goes to whenever there's growth, there is some sort of, a little bit of change and pain associated, maybe not physical pain, but it's just hard. It's awkward. It feels weird. And so you've
Absolutely.
just got to embrace that. And it's part of the, no pain, no gain. So just really kind of embracing that kind of mindset as well. I think it's fantastic. Darja, this has been so fascinating and so insightful. I love to ask all of our guests always one last question of, we really try to help women accelerate their success. And what would your, last piece of advice be for women on accelerating their success in this, day and age? What would you leave them with?
I think trusting yourself and trusting your both intuition and your thinking and relying on first principles thinking. So if it doesn't make sense for you, there is probably something up with that.
Mm,
Asking questions and not accepting anything else until you get to a point where it actually things start to make sense for you. So trusting your judgment intuitively as well as rationally is very important. And I wish I would have done this more often in the past. I think self-censoring and kind of self-judgment and doubting is definitely, I think, a thing that a lot of women struggle with, including
mhm.
myself. And I think having awareness that this is just something we struggle with. This doesn't define us.
Right.
We just need to label it as, oh, there's a doubt. Okay, it'll pass. This is not who we are. I think it's a very important point. And I think that probably combined with the growth mindset of understanding if I fail, it's because I didn't take the right approach. I maybe didn't put the right effort. Maybe I made some mistakes along the way. Maybe some of my assumptions are not correct. So none of this means that I am not capable, I am not a leader, I don't deserve this, or I can't do this. It only means I have to rest, reset, rethink, go back to the starting line and start over again, analyzing what has gone wrong the first time around. I think it's really, really important. And beyond that, I believe that, and I see that every day working with female founders, and I've been mentoring a lot of female founders lately as well. Women are so resilient and so persistent and so creative. And we need so much more of that energy, I think, in entrepreneurship, but also in the workplace overall. So it's really worth fighting for the stepping up and the voicing and kind of pushing for discomfort. Yes, I think that's just, I think what maybe the most important thing. Aside of this, as a tip maybe, or
Uh-huh.
as something that I wish I would have used more often, is use the resources that are available.
Mm,
Not being afraid to ask for help, not being afraid to ask for favors, not being afraid to dig into Google and find tools and hacks and toolkits.
mm,
And a bunch is a beautiful example. I think it gives a cutting edge because it gives a lot of access to mental frameworks and tips and templates that otherwise you would need to dig out and so on and so on. And that's something we basically shortcut the search for you and also the summarizing of the right mental models
mhm.
using these type of tools to really become better and improve every day just a little bit and not losing any day on the path towards it, I think is very important. And at the very end, being kind to yourself and being thankful for everything you bring to the table.
Absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much for that. And, Darja, I think, what you're bringing to the masses through Bunch is absolutely phenomenal. And it's so in line with what we do here at Beyond Barriers. So it has been absolutely wonderful having you on. And I know that our listeners are going to want to know more about Bunch and Darja and how to follow you and connect. So what is the best way for our listeners to get more or to learn more about you and Bunch? How can they be in touch?
Yeah, I would really love to hear from all of you, of course. And I think I'm best found nowadays on Twitter and Instagram, both Darja Gutnick. And I'm also trying out Clubhouse, so doing a
Oh,
lot of different sessions there, and also a really good place to connect and to actually speak with each other. So same nickname, Darja Gutnick there as well. And as for Bunch, it's currently available on the Apple App Store. So just simply going to the App Store and looking for Bunch Leadership or Bunch Leadership Coach, you'll find us. It's free. Download, try it out, and let us know what you think.
thank you so much, Darja. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing.